Niners, they made a couple of selections, a lot obviously in the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round, after none in the first two rounds. Me and Sunil, we're here to break it all down to you guys, give us our thoughts, and even talk about the UDFAs as well.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. First post-draft reaction kind of video here, and I've got my main guy. We haven't done one in a minute, but it's the perfect time to do one. Sunil, how you doing, man?
Doing fantastic, man. This is like one of the more exciting parts of the off season. You get a chance to see how good your team got. You get to start putting together who's going to be the paper champs, right? Who's the favorites? Did your team get closer to winning a Super Bowl or farther away from winning a Super Bowl based off of how the draft went? So it's a fun time to be a 49er fan in general.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this one was especially interesting because, I mean, even outside of the 49ers, just the top, right? Nobody knew really how the top was going to go because if you look at the odds and how it ended up going, I think number one and number two, especially at least at the end of the day, ended up being the same. But Will Anderson at 3, people were expecting a quarterback to get picked there. And then Richardson, people thought it would be Levis, but instead it's Richardson. Devin Witherspoon went a pick earlier than anticipated because the Seahawks passed on Jalen Carter. Just a lot of mix-up in the first round, a lot of intriguing picks. But we're here to talk about the Niners. We're here to talk about how their draft went, what we think about it, and things like that. So, Sunil, I'm going to ask you, just looking at the initial class, what were your thoughts just about the 49ers draft?
Definitely get to that, but before I do want to say, because it's not necessarily direct 49er talk, but a little bit of a spinoff. You got to say going into the draft and then what happened into the draft. Outside of obviously the Eagles, that I think had a phenomenal day on all 3 draft days, but it's nice to see 49ers kind of adjacent people making some big moves, right? We got to see obviously D'Amico Ryans and the crew for Houston do like the draft day, like straight from the movie kind of draft to take CJ Stroud number 2, draft up number 3 to take Will Anderson, which was fire. The Tennessee Titans making some moves to go get their quarterback and upgrade their team that way. And then going into the draft, the big trade obviously was Aaron Rodgers from Salah. So getting to see kind of like 49er adjacent people going out there being aggressive and getting their teams better. But obviously want to see them be successful, but not as successful as the 49ers, which is original, right? So my initial thoughts, Rohan, was at what point are people going to realize what the 49ers do in their first 3 rounds? There's all of this, like, people get frustrated. People are just like, why are they doing this? All this kind of stuff. I think for me personally, 49ers are one of a handful of teams that are extremely good at drafting. The proof is in the pudding. You look at the homegrown, or you look at the stars that the 49ers have. Outside of Trent Williams, outside of CMC, everybody else is homegrown. They know how to draft. They know how to pick in the draft. They know how to draft players and develop players. But in the first 3 rounds, they don't necessarily always go best player available. They go best player available for a position that they value. And value means either a need or a position that they are extremely in love with, which is usually D-line, trenches, things like that. And I think they did the same thing this year, right? So obviously they didn't get any picks up until the 3rd round. But in the 3rd round, they went up, drafted up to get Jair, who was a position of need. And many say, if not the best safety, one of the top 2 safeties available in the draft. So they went and got that guy, which was obviously a need. And then, the kicker, that's where the biggest debate is coming up, right, Rohan? As far as the kicker. But once again, best player available at a position of need or value, which is exactly what they did, right? So to me, whether you agree with it or not, I think that my initial thoughts are the 49ers held true to who they are when it comes to draft philosophy. And the third round is always kind of questionable. And then, the later rounds, you got to see really the skill of those that are drafting, the scouts and whatnot, because you got a lot of players that you can be excited about as far as depth, steals, and guys that you think could be pretty impactful for the team in the future to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think you talk about it right, where they got a certain philosophy that they're trying to attack right now, and it's positions, but it's also kind of going for need, and that's why a lot of people are like, well, in the later rounds, that's where Adam Peters gets to cook because he doesn't got to worry about conforming to need or anything like that. He's going to get his guys, and that's why you see a lot of these fifth, sixth, seventh round picks for the 49ers turn out more often than you'd expect with other teams. I'll preface my talk because it's going to be a little bit just what do you call it? Brute force. I'm
Brutal.
just going to just brutal. I'm just going to say as I say it. But 49ers were not going to expect to be having one of the best drafts in the this year. They didn't have a first or a second round pick. They didn't have a fourth round pick. And when you're talking about the bread and butter of the class, it was the middle rounds, right? And so you don't have an early round pick. You don't have even a second round pick. You don't even have a fourth round pick, right? And so what were they going to do? Got to start with Jair Brown. Loved it. I thought he was my top safety on the board at the time. And really, there were three safeties that I really liked that I was eyeing. Quan Martin out of Illinois, Sidney Brown, his teammate out of Illinois, and then Jair Brown. Those were the three safety that I was eyeing more so than others. Martin goes at pick 47, not even close. Sidney Brown gets taken by the Eagles. Phenomenal pick at 66. Then Jair Brown's there, but I don't think his slide would not have been that much more. 49ers trade up, they get their guy. If we're talking about Jair Brown as a prospect, he's a guy who I believe can really fit in well with the 49ers as their future starting safety alongside Talanoa Hufanga. I don't care about a 4.65 40 time. He plays a little faster than that, but overall, he's got short area quickness. Look at that 10-yard split. The biggest thing about Brown's game, instincts and coverage. He's a really good guy instinctually in coverage. He can really diagnose routes. He's got, and that really, when you talk about speed, overall speed, there's a difference between true speed and game speed. Game speed is what really matters. And game speed doesn't just involve athleticism. Game speed also involves how quick do you process the game. And so when you process as well, you can make up your lack of speed with the way that you process. And I think a guy like Jair Brown, he's able to do that. Got to improve as a tackler a little bit, but he's still he's not a I diagnose his run lanes well. He's able to get into the game into lanes. I think that he's going to be a very solid player for the 49ers. He has experience as a ball hawk, 10 in the last 2 years, and also he's got experience playing that cover one scheme. He's played in single high. He's played in two deep shells. He's got the different experience in the different sets the 49ers run at safety, alongside being a really good blitzer.
Yeah, I
49ers
think
traded up. Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think he even mentioned that he's a single high specialist. So I think he fits in really well with what Steve Wilkes is gonna run. And you mentioned a lot of it, man. Instincts, right? Measurables. He doesn't jump off the paper by any stretch of the imagination. He looks slow. He doesn't have, he doesn't seem like the most athletic. But when it comes to productivity, he's one of the best. And I saw a video Eric Crocker was talking about is like if he ran a 4.4 or a 4.5 and if he had like a longer jump and a higher higher jump, broader jump, all of those types of measurables, quote unquote, he'd be a first round pick. Literally the only reason why he's a third round pick is because his measurables aren't in that first round range. But as far as what people see on tape and what he's able to do at the position is very, very elite. Now, you mentioned a lot of the positives. He's a disruptor, which kind of goes along the trend of what the 49ers have done in the last few years as far as what they're looking for on the defensive side of the ball, especially in the secondary, Rohan. Ball hawks, guys that can turn the ball over, which is something that's very different than earlier in the Shanahan and Lynch regime. They're looking for playmakers on both sides of the ball, which I think is phenomenal. He flies around. You mentioned the 10 interceptions in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, there's nobody that's gotten more interceptions than he has, as far as production wise. And it's not like he was at some like low talent school. He's playing at Penn State, right? This is a Power 5 school at a very, very, the Big Ten, which we obviously know is a very elite conference in college. Where you mentioned some of the negatives, and maybe the only question mark is, he sometimes you mentioned, he needs to get better at tackling. It's not so much he needs to get better at tackling, like he's not a good tackler. He's just not always disciplined, right? He's so much always around the ball. He's always he's flying, which is why he gets so much production as far as takeaways. Sometimes he tends to overshoot his lane. Sometimes he tends to be out of control and can, whiff on tackles. So, being a little more disciplined is important, but I don't know how much better he's going to get, because you also don't want to tame him, because that same energy, that same kind of being just flying all over the field is what gets him production as well. The second thing is, one of the biggest, I guess, Achilles heels, you could say, Rohan, for the 49ers is the deep ball, right? When the speed receivers that are, kind of just going deep, and we've seen Hufanga get kind of lost on an island. It looks like Brown as well doesn't necessarily have the speed to keep up with some of these faster receivers. So it's going to be interesting, because that is an Achilles heel for the 49ers. I don't know if Jair Brown necessarily solves that issue. It seems like he'll still be somebody who, even though plays decently well in coverage, I think speed could be an issue when it comes to that. So obviously, scheme-wise, Steve Wilkes is going to have to figure that out, because that is definitely something that burned the 49ers in the past few seasons.
Yeah. Everything. I like what you said there. And talking about the aggressiveness, an area where I do think that Wilkes could channel the aggression, blitzes. Jair Brown's a good blitzer. We saw that 4.5 sacks, I believe, last year on 51 attempts, 15 pressures. Steve Wilkes also loves to blitz from the nickel. That's something that he liked to do. He also has experience running a variety of different defenses, and he's known to be aggressive. So I think that in a way, it's a good system fit there. However, the biggest talk of the town was Mr. Jake Moody at 99. I'll let you go first. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, so look, obviously this is the most controversial pick that the 49ers had. And, is it ideal to pick a kicker in the third round? Obviously the answer is no, because you usually think you could utilize that pick on other players. However, once again, you mentioned, Rohan, some of the limitations that the 49ers had in this draft as far as where they're picking and not having, higher picks and things like that. For me, goes back to what I think the 49ers philosophy is, not necessarily just taking best player available, but best player available at a specific position that they value or a position of need. The only guaranteed position that a rookie, or the most likely position that a rookie would be able to start on this team this season, is kicker. It's the only position there's not a bona fide starter at. And it's a very important position, right? They need to have a very solid kicker to be able to compete in this. Now, let me tell you why I think this isn't as terrible of pick as some people are mentioning, because of how high they picked him. I think because Robbie Gould is so good in field goals and clutch kicks, especially in the postseason, that a lot of people don't look at maybe some of the deficiencies that were there as far as what could be the difference between getting the team to be even better when it comes to special teams. So the one that is blatantly glaring is the 49ers were the 28th ranked team when it came to touchbacks, right? Out of 32 teams. So we're talking about one of the worst teams as far as that. So why is that so important? When you're giving, teams the ability to run the ball, and necessarily get better field position, when you're giving them a chance, like obviously there's chances that you could hold them, behind the 25-yard line, but there are many times where teams are getting to the 30, teams are getting to the 35, or you have that momentum shift that's able to be there. Also, kicking the returns and stuff like that could lead to injuries on special teams, so on and so forth. The 49ers have just been terrible at that because they haven't had that strength in the leg. So Jake Moody obviously is known as one of the strongest legs, if not the strongest leg that was in the draft this year. So that automatically could get solved by that. The second thing is, how can Jake Moody become even more of a weapon than Robbie Gould was? Robbie Gould was extremely consistent. However, he didn't really have as much range as Jake Moody has. And specifically, let's go 40 to 49 yards, right?
The deeper side, yeah.
Yeah, the deeper side. Robbie Gould was somewhere around 82% when it came to that last season. I think it was like 7 out of 11 or something like that. Jake Moody was 92%, a whole 10 percentage points above that, right? He had 3 kicks that he made over 50 yards. I think Robbie Gould only made 2 over 50 yards. So we're automatically giving the offense the ability to get points without having to drive the ball as far. So if you're able now to stretch that to where instead of 30 to 40 yards being that sweet spot, which Robbie Gould is amazing at, now you're pushing that back to 40 to 50 yards, 50 yards plus. That's giving your team an extra 10, 15 yards that they don't need to be able to gain to gain points. So to me, Rohan, I think that Jake Moody out of this draft class immediately becomes the most impactful player to help make this team that much better. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of arguments, and probably from the looks on your face, you're probably one of those guys that's going to be like, this is an idiotic pick. But to me, as far as does this player help the team become better immediately? Can this guy be the difference between the 49ers winning a game and losing a game? I think that he does. And because of where they picked, the fact that they didn't have a 4th round pick, and you saw that the New England Patriots traded up to get a kicker, right? To me, this was by far the best kicker in the draft. It's a position that they needed, and it's a guy that they all fell in love with. I think you go out and get that guy, even if it's, higher than maybe some people are comfortable with.
Now, what I'll say is everything that you brought up is true, right? In terms of impact player for this class, Jake Moody is the starting kicker. Zane Gonzalez is going to get cut. I mean, the John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan said it today. Yesterday. The only position that they viewed that they felt they needed a starter at was that kicker, and they got what they feel is the best one in the draft in Jake Moody. However, with the way that the 49ers are positioned and the way that this draft was, I thought it's irresponsible for you to select a kicker at the highest position that a kicker has ever been selected since 2016. In fact, since 2011, there have only been 4 kickers selected before the 5th round. 2 of them were in this draft. Both of them I felt were reaches, even though they're talented players. One was Robert Aguayo, and then another one was last year in Cade York. When you talk about the problem with kickers, I've never done research on kicker stats before in my life, and that changed because I wanted to see truly how does the draft portion translate to what actually happens. And I found out last year the top 22 kickers in accuracy, only 7 of them were drafted. And even if you looked in the top 10, only 2 of them were drafted. Now, Jake Moody, solid kicker, like you said, accurate in that middle portion range. However, overall, Jake Moody, it's a little tough in terms of his overall accuracy because Moody, 82% this past year, had a really good 2021, but 82% this past year, I think 81.9% or something like that over his entire collegiate career. That's not that good. That's not, if we're being honest, that's in the bottom 20s, in the 20s overall. And to me, like, it's not even about that. It's more so not about the player, but rather the value that you selected him at. Drafting a kicker at 99, even if he's going to be gone, I felt was too high. It's just, when you had other positions of not necessarily need, but when you're the 49ers, look at what the Eagles did. I'm not going to try and compare their drafts because of the first round picks. I'm saying look at the later rounds. You're not drafting for right now. Your roster is one of the best right now. How do you keep the roster as one of the best as you move forward? You replace positions in the future. Offensive tackle was on the board. And I'm not saying I'm the biggest fan of maybe the guys that were still on the board, but still, I think that there was value there. I thought there was value at other positions. I thought we'll get to Cameron Law too. I thought there was value at other positions as well. If you wanted to go edge, if you wanted to go receiver, if you wanted to go several other positions, I thought that there was significant value on the board because a lot of key players are falling after they selected Jair Brown. I thought it was even there, and even if they were dead set on taking the kicker, it you needed to trade down. You had to trade down there. You saw at the top of the fourth round how much value there was for teams looking to trade down. The Philadelphia Eagles even sent a third round pick in 2024 to move up for a fourth round selection. You could have gotten good value for that pick because of because teams understood there is so much value on the board. We've got to go get it. I thought that was a mistake by the 49ers. And really, I thought reaching for a kicker this high, especially when the hit rate on kickers isn't as high, and also because the value that teams normally go for, you can tend to get in undrafted free agency. I just didn't like the pick. I thought that this arguably was the worst pick that the 49ers had, even though the player for me is fine. Great leg, and I do think that your touchback point is really important, but I also think that there are significantly several kickers that you could find that fit that mold too, Zane Gonzalez included. And to me, it's about value. That's the primarily thing. It's about value, and I understand it's a crapshoot. Right? The draft's a crapshoot, but I think you
Right.
still got to capitalize on value, especially looking forward in the future.
Well, I mean, value is all perception, right? So, you look at some of the third round picks that the 49ers have done in the last few years. You look at Trey Sermon, no longer on the team. Ambry Thomas never touches the field. TDP, he's looking like he's somebody that's not, going to see the field too often, right? That's not the case for Jake Moody. There's nobody that's questioning whether or not Jake Moody is going to get much playing time on the 49ers.
I'll give you a hot take as you move on. I would have taken Roschon Johnson there at 99, a running back over the kicker. I think the running back would have provided more value at that point.
Maybe, but Roschon Johnson might not even make the team, to be honest, because the 49ers stable of running backs is pretty filled right now. He would be competing for that. So we've seen a lot of these third round picks that the 49ers have taken, which may have been better value, not pan out. So once you mentioned that it was a crapshoot, I want to mention, you said that 82%. And once again, I think that sometimes just the numbers on their own without context can seem like 82% doesn't sound good, but he went 3 for 7 when it came to kicks over 50 yards. He was attempting kicks that were 56 yards, 59 yards, 60 yards kicks. Michigan was having him do. These are like Hail Mary kicks that he went 3 for 7. I think his long for the year last year was like 59 yards. So, but if you take that 3 for 7 out, he went 26 of 28 from 0 to 49 yards. That's ridiculous numbers when you're talking about accuracy, clutchness, so on and so forth. And this isn't a guy. Zane Gonzalez has played in Arizona. He played in Arizona for college. He's played in warm weather places. We're talking about Jake Moody is making these kicks in the dead of winter in Michigan, right? So when you're talking about clutchness, you're talking about the type of kicker that you want, and you're talking about the highest scoring players in the NFL of all time are all what position, Rohan?
Wait, in all the NFL? What do you mean?
Yeah, when you look at just the records, who was the highest scoring players in all?
Oh, you're saying kicker? Yeah,
it's kickers, right? So if you can get everybody's you could patchwork these kickers, and everybody's accurate, right? You can always find a kicker. Nobody really sets on a kicker unless they're, like the guy out in Baltimore, or you have like Tucker or whatever the case may be. But for me, if you get Jake Moody, and Jake Moody becomes the 49ers kicker for the next decade, for the next 15 years, to me, you're not going to look back and be like, well, they took him in the 3rd round, so it wasn't worth it. To me, you take a player that's going to immediately make an impact on the team, immediately make the team better, and everybody else, as far as value, these are all perceived. Jake Moody is somebody who's actually can be tangible, that we're going to see make a difference on the team immediately. And the way they talked about his makeup, he comes from Harbaugh, who we all love as far as a coach, and has ties to obviously the 49ers. He gave glowing recommendations about him. Everybody signed off on him. Yes. Is it the sexiest pick? No. But I do think that it's going to be a valuable pick. I do think that Jake Moody next season is going to be the reason why we win some games. And people are going to fall in love with the fact that now, maybe we could, we're in field goal range 10 yards deeper than we've been in the past, which I think makes Shanahan's life a lot easier too in some of these decision makings, which, came to go for it or kick the field goal. I think when you have a guy who has a strong leg, it makes life a lot easier. And we haven't had that in some time.
And I mean, that's fair. That's fair. To me, though, to warrant the selection, Moody has to be a top 5 kicker in the NFL.
Sure.
Can he be that? Of course. And it's tough. The only thing is, I wonder how quickly does he adapt to the NFL? Because we do see undrafted kickers like go straight to joining NFL action. Cameron Dicker last year was the most accurate kicker. He was an undrafted guy for the LA Chargers. I just think that there's so much value elsewhere that you could stay off the kicker. And I understand that it's the one position where you could have looked at. But it's great kicker talk. Obviously, we disagree. Still, great points here, I believe, on both sides. And I think that, yeah, it's a valuable discussion. And one, again, like I said when we prefaced this, the draft, you evaluate the draft 3 to 5 years down the line. Right now, all we could talk about is the perceived value. We can't really talk about what's going to happen because we don't know. And so that's the whole point of this draft conversation. But let's move on to the other 3rd round pick, Cam Latu, tight end, Alabama. How are you feeling about that one?
So this is the most questionable pick that I think the 49ers had. So I know a lot of people said it was the Jake Moody pick. To me, the Cameron Latu pick I was kind of like, what? Like, there was better people, I felt like, on the board. And as far as what the 49ers look for, or the type of tight ends that the 49ers have utilized, Cameron Latu doesn't fit that mold, right? Usually they want a blocker first and then a pass catcher second. Cameron Latu is like the opposite. He's more of a pass catcher than he is a blocker, and he's not even the greatest at pass catching compared to some of the other tight ends that are out there. So, you look at like a guy like Ross Dwelley. Ross Dwelley he has, golden hands, right? Ross Dwelley is a great pass catcher, but he could barely make the field because he's not necessarily the blocker that Kyle Shanahan wants him to be. So I'm a little questioning why Cameron Latu was the pick, just because he's not necessarily like the most willing and avid blocker. He's not necessarily like super great at pass catching at the tight end position. So I mean, the only thing that I could really think about it is that, as far as he was one of I think 2 or 3 tight ends that were invited to George Kittle's tight end university as far as collegiate tight ends and stuff like that. So I don't know if there was some kind of connection there, but for me, I was really Cameron Latu. I mean, obviously the pedigree as far as coming from Alabama and, all that kind of stuff is great, but he was a pick that I thought you could pick a lot lower because I don't think he makes the field anytime soon. And I don't really see him as the prototypical tight end that Shanahan likes utilizing.
I didn't like this one either. I'll be honest. I thought it was a reach at this position. Tight end, I wanted them to draft a tight end. I actually also like the idea of drafting 2 tight ends. I think I think that there's value in that. We'll get to other positions later, but tight end, I thought that there was more value on the board. And when you look at the tight ends, especially recently, there's a pattern between athletic tight ends and success. Athletic tight ends, elusive tight ends, and success. There was a chart that came out by PFFs. I forget exactly who put it out, but there's somewhat of a correlation. And even then, you look on film in itself, and I thought that there were better tight ends on the board at at number 99 where the 49ers are selecting. Cam Latu, not the best athlete. He is a fine blocker. He's a solid pass catcher, but 11.1% drop rate, that's scary. His athletic traits not necessarily testing out well for his route running abilities. That's another thing to worry about. How well is he after the catch? That's something you have to see at the next level. And so for me, I'm not the biggest fan of the pick. Can Latu be a good player? Yes. But I thought that the 49ers should look to try and find a guy who they believe he might not be the guy right now, but they believe can be molded into the eventual starter at tight end over George Kittle. A guy like Zach Kuntz. I'm not going to say I'm the biggest Zach Kuntz fan overall, but I thought that his athletic profile at least made it intriguing enough to where you could warrant a selection at 99 and take a player like that with his athletic profile to potentially develop. They ended up taking Braden Willis later. I really like that pick because I scouted him. I thought he's a better player. He's a little more versatile. It seems like he could play some fullback too, and he's a pass catcher. He can catch a lot of touchdowns. That's something that Latu did as well, despite his drop rate. I think that's something similar, but I was not a big fan necessarily of this pick either.
Yeah, and I think I watched a little bit of you streaming. I think during, or maybe it was something you were tweeting. You mentioned that both of these tight ends that they ended up picking were good red zone options. So maybe that was kind of more what they're looking for because, especially Jennings most likely isn't going to be on the team probably in the future just because he'll be outpriced or whatnot. And, you need those kind of big bodies to be red zone options. And they don't just have a lot of them on the 49ers altogether, right? So maybe that's something that they're looking for down the line to have more options there. But I agree with you. I was a little perplexed at it. Obviously pedigree and Nick Saban, I think, plays a big role in who the 49ers do draft. I think they do look for that kind of stuff. But, yeah, I'm with you. This one was a question mark for me for sure.
Yeah. Let's go a little positive to start because, last two picks, more of a negative reaction for me. Favorite picks. And actually, before we get there, do want to give a shout out to the people in the chat. My guy Marco, thank you for tuning in. Obviously, we do a lot of content together. Spy Nick Danger, thank you for tuning in as well. Make sure both of you, everyone in the chat, make sure you go hit that like button. We appreciate all of your support. We love keeping this content out, and obviously, it's about the draft. Hot topic, so be sure to keep the content out, or be sure to keep the like button out so we can get this content out. 49ers Throwback, thank you for tuning in, as well as Yafi and Mike Scott. But let's go to the favorite picks. Where are you thinking? Who? You don't have to give me one, but who in consensus was your favorite overall?
So there was a lot. Like I liked a lot of the 49ers picks. I think majority of them I liked, but the guy that I want to mention is D Winters, man, from TCU. He's somebody who I think is going to be a fan favorite immediately. I think he fits the mold of the linebackers that we have right now in Warner and Dre Greenlaw. A lot of people kind of mention him as far as like a Dre Greenlaw type mold because of his speed and, tackling prowess. He does really, really good against the run, which I think is extremely important for a linebacker, especially with the 49ers. And, the linebackers play such a big role in the run defense. But he's good in coverage. And I think Rohan, we have probably the best linebacker in the league when it comes to coverage in Fred Warner. To have another guy that's just a pure athlete that, can fly all around and be another guy that could cover as a linebacker and has the speed to maybe keep up with some of these skill positions, whether it be a slot guy or a linebacker. It's just a phenomenal pick to get him, especially in the 6th round, right? And this is a guy who's a captain of a team that overachieved this year, right? Nobody had TCU as making it all the way to the championship game. Nobody had them beating Michigan. And when you're talking about a captain of a team, to be able to get his teammates ready for the type of season that they ended up having, there's something special about those guys. And I think that coming into the culture that the 49ers have, I think he's going to be amazing, man. And I really think, obviously we know what the 49ers are capable of doing with linebackers and developing guys. This is a guy whose starting point is a lot higher than some of the linebackers that they've been able to develop in the past. specific like a guy like Aziz. I don't think Aziz had any of the measurables or any of the type of traits that D has coming in starting position. We saw what Aziz was able to do in this system. So I'm excited about the next few years, especially with the guy that doesn't necessarily need to come in and make a big impact in year one. He gets to sit behind Greenlaw. He gets to sit behind, obviously, the best linebacker in the game right now, Fred Warner. But knock on wood, we know, Greenlaw's gotten injured and missed some games. To have a guy like this jump in, who I think can immediately come in and be a playmaker, I'm really, really excited about this pick, if you can't tell.
Hey, I'm right with you. Like I said, wasn't a big fan of 99 and 101, but I like Jair Brown. And D Winters is a guy. He's just another guy who the 49ers envision can be a linebacker type of player. Good speed, and especially sideline to sideline. Good angles in the run game. Solid run defender. He's the Aziz replacement at the moment. Well, he won't be in year one, but he has the potential to be, a sub linebacker in the NFL, a solid pass rushing, solid off ball linebacker, or sorry, a solid on ball linebacker. And so to me, I think that D Winters is going to be a solid player overall from TCU. Lot of highlights, obviously on tape itself, but what he
And a
does
guy
well,
immediately,
yeah, go for
Rohan,
it.
a guy immediately, sorry to cut you off, immediately can make an impact on special teams too. Like with his
That yeah,
speed and his size, like that's a guy who could immediately come in and be a gunner or something on the team and make an impact there and is willing to, I would think, because of just the makeup of the player as well. Didn't mean to cut you off.
no, you're absolutely right. And I think the 49ers, we took, I believe, 9 selections in this class. I was a huge fan of Brown. Was a huge fan of the corner in 5th round, Darrell Luther, out of
Talk
South
about him.
Alabama.
Talk about him.
Yeah,
Talk about him.
Darrell Luther. I mean, in my opinion, Marco's been high on him for a long time, and I recently watched him, and we were talking even about potentially hearing his name at 99. That's how it was going, and the 49ers got him in the back end of the 5th round. Luther, solid corner. I think he can play in both press and zone schemes. Good length, and he's in a way a little reminiscent of Samuel Womack from a year ago. Womack obviously 5'9", 187 when he was drafted. Luther 6', 189. But Luther's got 32-inch arms. Womack had 34-inch arms. Longer arms, and he's a solid cornerback. Good speed, solid athlete. I think he fits in well with what the 49ers want to do. Now, whether he plays on the inside or outside, I think depends a little more on his weight. Can he become a little bigger? But he's got solid size, and he's got good hands and good length, which is why I think he's a solid pick. Also, like the defensive end Robert Beal out of Georgia. I mean, the 49ers had to go defensive end at some point, and I liked Beal. He's got, again, solid traits with those long arms, can be versatile. He's big enough. He's 6'4", around 250 pounds, good strength, and I think that he's a good developmental guy that will improve if he learns a solid amount of pass rush moves from Chris Kosarek. And I mean, it's Chris Kosarek again, so you get worried a lot. Well, not a little bit, just a lot less, just because of his way that he can develop defensive linemen. I think Beal was another pick. I talked about Winters, and so those
Let
guys.
me tell you what I like Beal a lot, and I want to tell you why. You look at that Georgia defensive line, which 90% of them are on the Eagles now, right? So good luck to us because we're gonna have to face them consistently in the Eagles 49ers burgeoning rivalry. But there's a couple of things that stood out to me about Bill Jr. One, last year, not this last season, but the year before, he had 6 sacks, which led the team, right? But he's not an every down player. And what I mean by that is you think he knows how to be productive around super talented defensive line. And what's going to be his position on this defensive line, right? Nick Bosa,
Go get the pass rusher,
Hargrave, right? He's going to be around some really, really good players. And finding a player that knows how to play on with guys that are maybe more talented than him or definitely have more recognition than him and still be able to be productive, I think is huge because that's exactly what he's going into with the 49ers as well. The second thing that really stood out to me, Rohan, was if you look at some of the bigger games that he played in, last year in the national championship game, the year before, the game before that, and in the SEC championship game, he was productive in all of those games with multiple tackles, sacks, pressures, things like that. And once again, he's a rotational player. He's not somebody who's every down. So the ability to just maximize and be a specialist, instead of like an every down, or without being productive without necessarily needing to play every single down, I think is extremely important, especially in a defensive line where we now have 3 down players pretty much at every single position. So he's not going to be able to get as much playing time or necessarily as many reps. So you look at some of the guys, like some of the players like Charles Omenihu, when he first came on the team, not last year, but the year before, where he came in on the trade, not getting a lot of playing time, but still being able to be extremely effective. Jordan Willis, another guy who wasn't getting like every down snaps, but still able to be effective. Finding a guy like Beal, who I think can be that same type of player, which can still be productive without needing a ton of opportunity. I think that he's able to be that successful at a college level, I think is just going to be able to be even bigger and better on the 49ers, because that's predominantly the role that I think he's going to play, at least in the next couple of years.
I agree. And I think he's a valuable guy for the team. And I think overall, I mean, you trust the track record with defensive players that the 49ers have had, especially front 7 players. And I think that this just adds to the depth. Defensive end was a position they needed a draft, not only for this year, but for the future, because right now it seems like 3 guys were locked to make the roster before Beal. That was Bosa, that was Drake Jackson, that was Clelin Ferrell. I don't think anybody else is the lock to make the roster. Beal now becomes a guy as a part of that rotation, and I think it's a solid pick. The last guy that I like, we talked about Braden Willis a little bit and my affinity for him, but the last guy I liked was Ronnie Bell, the receiver. 49ers, you gotta understand where they are with the receiver position, right? Juwan Jennings, restricted free agent next year. Ray McLeod, unrestricted free agent next year. And so you need a guy who can likely compete in the slot. Ronnie Bell out of Michigan, 6 foot, 180 pounds. He's a solid player in the slot, and he's able to do
looks like you froze a little bit, Rohan.
He's able to be a really good route, the most important element for. And I think overall,
you're just delayed right now. Not yet.
Okay.
There we go. Now you're good. You caught up. Your mouth caught up to your sound now. Or maybe not. Maybe you're still frozen.
Good. Let's talk. What do you think about Ronnie Bell?
Yeah, I mean, look, Ronnie Bell, I think, is going to be a guy that could be impactful on the team. Unfortunately, the 49ers have done a really good job not drafting injury-prone players, quote unquote, or guys that have had major injuries. Ronnie Bell obviously has suffered, a severe knee injury in his career, so that's a little bit, a little bit worrisome, just because we know the track record of the 49ers when it comes to guys that have had injuries. However, late round pick, somebody who, if he makes the team, great. If he doesn't make the team, it isn't the end of the world. A guy that I think can, possibly play some special teams right behind Ray McLeod. At least you have another option there. Ronnie Bell has the speed and has done that in his collegiate career as well. So I don't think it's a bad pick. I think obviously for where they drafted him, it fits a need. Definitely depth there, and he, once again, a guy that doesn't need to come in and necessarily make a huge impact, can sit back, kind of like we saw previous wide receivers just sit back and kind of learn and play spot duty and kind of be there in a couple years from now when we might need him. So I don't know, Rohan. I think you might be frozen, my guy. Yeah, went out. So one thing I did want to talk about was some guys that off of the undrafted free agent list that I think should be looked at. And there's one in particular. I think, as far as the 49ers overall, one thing that people questioned was there wasn't anybody picked at offensive line, and at least within the first 7 rounds. So Shanahan and Lynch spoke about it. Obviously, they would want to pick an offensive lineman if there was somebody that fit the mold and was somebody that they felt like could make the team. However, because of where they picked, there we go. Rohan, you back?
We're good now. We're good.
All
Don't
right,
worry.
yeah. You on your phone? I like it.
I just changed it, so now we're chilling. Yeah,
All
we're
right,
good.
cool, bro. So yeah, I was just kind of mentioning I was gonna transition into some of the undrafted free agents. So that I liked. So I was mentioning one of the critiques, I guess, of this draft was 49ers didn't go anywhere on the offensive line in the draft. And, I think Shanahan and Lynch kind of discussed it, mentioning, look, they obviously would want to take offensive line. We know how much the trenches are important to the 49ers. However, because of where they picked and, how the draft, how their draft board ended up falling to them, they didn't see a player that they felt like fit the culture or fit the role that they needed. As far as the type of offensive lineman they looked at. What's funny, Rohan, is, a lot of people always are going at the 49ers as far as their offensive line, especially this regime. I actually did some research, and in the last 5 years, they've actually selected 7 people on the offensive line. And out of those 7 players that they selected, Colton McKivitz is about to be the 4th that is going to be, full-time starter, right? So they obviously have McGlinchey, Aaron Banks,
Burford.
Spencer Burford, and now Colton McKivitz. 4 out of those 7. So the 49ers actually do draft a lot of offensive linemen, and not only draft, like very productive productive guys that ended up being the starters. So what's that? That's going to be 60% of their starting offensive line are going to be homegrown talent, which is, pretty great. And if you get your guy Zakil in there as well at some point, that's going to be, 80%. So I think that sometimes it's a little overblown, this narrative that the 49ers don't invest enough into offensive line. However, the guy that I like is actually a guy that they brought in through undrafted free agents is Joey Fisher, the tackle out of Shepherd. So he's a big guy, right? I looked at your article, and saw his measurables. He's a really big guy. I think the reason why he went undrafted is not because of his size or his production, Rohan. It's because of the level of competition that he played. And I think he has like shorter arms for a tackle position. But if you look at some of the film that I saw on him, the dude is fierce, man. He's extremely tough, extremely strong. He was brutal at the point of contact. And, he's a guy that, maybe there's a lot of question marks because he hasn't played, high level talent, but we've seen sometimes these guys come in, and even though it hasn't, you don't know till you find out in training camp. And if this is a guy that what he's able to do at Shepherd can translate into the NFL as far as his strength and his ability at right tackle, he could either be, a definite depth piece because he's played so much right tackle in his collegiate career. And maybe, who knows, man, could he be a starter? I don't know. That would be a crazy, crazy story, obviously, but crazier things have happened. But that's a guy that I'm really interested to see how his camp goes. And, if he's a guy who could make the team.
I agree. I mean, Joe Shepard, I think, is the number 1 guy that they got in undrafted free agency. Solid player. And I'm not going to say I liked their process of not going for a line, nor did I like their justification that they didn't believe anybody on the board would beat out or have a chance at a roster spot over Matt Pryor, Jalen Moore, and Colton McKivitz. I don't believe that. I personally don't. But Shepard, solid player, should have gone drafted, ended up not. He's a little, you're right, size is interesting. He's a little smaller. He's 6'4", 290. That's a little smaller, especially because he played tackle. He can't play tackle likely in the NFL with that size, but he's strong, man. He plays bigger than what his size might indicate. He's strong. 40 bench reps at the combine. He ran solid too, 4.9. So he's got great traits. And he, like you said, he's a guy who moves people. He's powerful in the run game. And so to me, that intrigues me. I think he's a solid player. Do I think he'll make the roster in year one? Don't don't know. Probably leaning towards no, but if you could keep him and develop him, another player that could be a very solid contributor, at least as a rotational piece, at least in the future.
Ron, it's interesting that you mentioned Colt McKivitz. So I went on a cruise a few weeks ago, and I actually on the same cruise was a current NFL player that plays for a rival team of ours in our division. Right? He plays for the Seattle Seahawks, right? And he trains with Colt McKivitz. And
Abe
so,
Lucas or who?
huh? Now I'm not going to mention the name. I'll mention it off camera to you. I'll tell you, but I don't want to mention it just because I don't know if I say anything that gets in trouble, right? But he told me that we're going to be happy with Colt McKivitz. He said from what he's been seeing off season, what the type of player is, caliber of guy he is, and so on and so forth, that we may be sleeping on him, and that there's a reason why. Well, he didn't say this, but there's a reason why the 49ers haven't really panicked at right tackle and were willing to trade, Mike McGlinchey even last season. I think that maybe we may be short playing Colt McKivitz, to be seen, but I've heard, from obviously people that have worked with him now. Obviously, the coaching staff is saying what they're saying. We might need to give him a chance, man, and see what he's capable of. Obviously is there. They didn't draft anybody to be a right tackle. They haven't gone out in free agency to try to solve that problem. And I haven't heard any negative things about him. Let's just put it that way. So it's going to be interesting to see, what he is capable of.
I do agree. I do think it's important to give him a chance to win the starting job. And I think, obviously, right now he's the odds-on favorite. I don't believe either player on the roster at right tackle will beat him out right now. Now, as for the draft, the thing for me was I wasn't anticipating them drafting a starter. I didn't think the guy who they drafted would end up starting in year one. I actually thought more so it's a developmental piece to when in 2024 when you want to move off McKivitz or obviously, his contract can be moved off, or if you want to keep him as a swing tackle, it's viable. It's viable because you'd have a developed guy. We're back. Unfortunately, though, that did not end up being the case. They didn't end up getting that offensive lineman, and so don't necessarily like the decision. But cool undrafted free agent here with Joey Fisher. Last question for me. Actually, I'll let you go ahead and I'll ask the question. What's up?
Yeah, I had a question, and it wasn't necessarily about the draft, but some stuff that happened. I think it was during the draft, or maybe the day before the draft, which was the CMC contract. Going ahead and restructuring that to get some money there, which is extremely interesting, man. Intriguing because they didn't necessarily need it right away. Obviously, they kind of played it off like we were right up against it for signing this draft class and all that kind of stuff. But usually they always have to kind of restructure a contract to sign their draft class, and they usually do it after the draft. They're not usually doing it before the draft or during the draft like they did with CMC. Did you find that peculiar? Yeah. My question to you is, one, did you find that peculiar, or was it just a case of they didn't really have anything to do day one of the draft, so they just kind of got this done because maybe they just had to quote unquote free time to get it done earlier than usual?
Now, if you're talking about the timing, I'll say yes and no. Did that happen during the draft? I don't think that's the bigger point, but more so that it happened before May 2nd, which is the first day that teams can sign players without having to worry about the compensatory formula. The 49ers are a team that loves their compensatory picks, and they will not lose compensatory picks if they sign players on May 2nd, which would eliminate the compensatory picks that they currently possess. So that's where I was looking for more so. And I also think it hints potentially at the 49ers bringing in another player, or also understanding that they have $11 million in cap space. They may want to save it for the school year. Or not the school year, but the NFL year.
Actually, yeah.
I get my college now with the draft mixed up. Oh my lord! But no, save it for the NFL year. And because a lot of teams like making in-season adjustments, training camp adjustments, like to Sean Gibson that they signed this past year. And I know that was for cheap money, but you could save it for that. The timing to me is intriguing more so though because of that May 2nd date. Because I do envision that they try and get maybe another edge rusher in the mix. That could be a place. I told you about the 3 players that I believe are guarantees. If the 49ers want to carry 10 to 11 defensive linemen again, probably around 10, you might want 5 edge, 5 D tackles. And so they could look for another edge rusher, especially a guy who has a lot more experience to help shed some of the pressure off of Drake Jackson.
Yeah, and I mean, there's 2 or 3 guys that are out there that would be extremely intriguing. Obviously, the one we were talking about all offseason was Yannick Ngakoue. Right. He would be obviously the odds-on favorite as far as his age, productivity, and how he would fit in. You would think that he would want to play on a defensive line that has, the 3 other starters on there. He's going to have a lot of one-on-one options out there, which I think he could definitely eat as far as that. But another guy's Frank Clark, man. Like, I know there's been, maybe he's not necessarily quote unquote the best teammate or, stuff like that, but he's been extremely productive with the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, won a couple of rings with him and with them. And, he could be a guy that's on the team. So there are some guys out there that I think could definitely make the team better. And especially with what you saw the Eagles be able to do, this offseason, the 49ers I think the 49ers have an intact roster that could definitely compete, but you get more talent, that's always going to make it a little bit easier, right?
100%. And I think that there's still a lot of edge talent remaining. You talked about those 2 names. I'll just throw another name in Leonard Floyd out there. I mean, there's a lot of names still out there for the edge market. I think they can get whoever they want at a solid price, understanding now how far they are into the offseason. And normally teams don't pay and players settle for shorter deals and more cheaper deals in the offseason at this point. And so, yeah, definitely agree with what you're saying there.
What are the 49ers figures right now? Do you know that offhand?
11 million, I believe, is where they're at. They were at
how much would they need to sign their draft class?
Like $1 million more, maybe. Maybe $1 million. Yeah, probably $1 million, $2 million more. Understanding because off-season involves the top 51 rule, and so it's the top 51 contracts, and a lot of those contracts are going to be under $1 million. And I believe their top 51 marker, like the last contract, is like maybe 1.2 million, 1.1 million, somewhere around there. And so I don't think that a good portion of this draft class is going to count against the cap until after the 53-man roster is decided and when the cap space goes back to 53.
So pretty much, how much of this 11 million can they use to sign somebody?
I think probably 8 to 9 million of it. And I mean, this is not the only avenue. I think that you can utilize a good amount of it. And you also remember that Nick Bosa's extension is going to free up some cap space this year as well, or this offseason as well. So the 49ers could utilize all of the money that they just created with McCaffrey on the open market, understanding that they'll create more money for preseason and in-season acquisitions with Nick Bosa's contract.
So they could be pretty aggressive then.
I think they can. I don't know if they will. I believe there are only 6 spots before, like the 6 spots under the 90 man. And I mean, we've heard it. They have a vote of confidence in their roster. But I do believe that they can be aggressive if they want. Maybe even target multiple players. It's just a matter of liking of what do they want to trust the undrafted guys, or do they want to go with more experienced options who will cost a little more and you don't get team control against them for obviously team control with the draft pick would be 4 years-ish.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I didn't realize that they could use that much of the 11 million and still be able to sign their rookie class. So that's exciting, man, because that means they could be competitive against maybe some other guys. Because I think Yannick, if they could get Yannick, I think that's a game changer. I think that now they're right up there with the Eagles as far as being able to be competitive, just because we're going to be able to wreak as much havoc as any other team. So,
I mean, yeah, especially with the way this draft went, it's going to be an intriguing one. And I mean, I think that there's still, I don't think the door's out on anything yet. I think that they're still going to evaluate their options at positions like edge. Again, draft-wise, not necessarily, I'm not going to call it a failure at all. I don't think that's true at all. I liked half the picks, but I'll say right now it's like a wish-wash draft for me. Just understanding the value behind some selections, although I can understand the arguments that you brought up in some of those as well.
I love it. I love it, man. Anything else you
Hey,
wanted to talk about?
I think we covered every topic today. So, I mean, it was a fun talk. Excuse me. Talked about the initial thoughts on the draft. Talked about our favorite picks. We talked about the UDFAs, some of the things that we found questionable. Our respective differences, and some of the players we really liked. So, a lot to talk about. Unpacked what they could do even in free agency in a few days. So, it's a great episode. Any last thoughts, Neil, before we head on out?
No, man. So what are just before we go, what are the next dates we need to be paying attention to as 49er fans?
So I believe May 2nd, like I said, for free agents, but rookie minicamp comes up soon. Then it's mandatory minicamp in June. June 13th, I believe the 15th is mandatory minicamp. That's going to happen for the 49ers, and that's where everybody comes together for the first time. The holdout people won't show up to voluntary workouts coming up soon, but everyone shows up to mandatory minicamp. And then after that, obviously, it's a 40-day layoff before training camp.
Love it. The encyclopedia, Rohan Chakravarthi.
But I mean, it's a puts a good use here. Puts a good use here, and we're having a great time. Suneil, as always, I appreciate your here talking with me. Football, great here on a Sunday night. Guys in the chat, thank you guys so much for tuning in because we appreciate all your comments. We appreciate you guys giving support. Be sure to head to each channel, Suneil's channel and my channel. Hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe for more draft content, which is coming soon over the course of the week. Me and Suneil will be back soon as our schedules align with some more content. But thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time.